everyone. Welcome to another episode of Compensation Insider. And I'm really excited for this session because we have a really hot topic and a really wise guest with us today, Sean, who comes with over 30 years of experience, has worked with many innovative companies in the domain of total rewards. He's been with Uflex, Conferry, he's now with Visier, right? So, Sean, why don't you quickly introduce our audience to yourself and then we'll dive directly into the topic.
Yeah, bro, that's a tough start though. You tell over 30 years. So I have to tell people I started when I was like 10. You're basically saying I'm a really old dude right out of the gate. Yeah, most of my experience. So yeah, I generally tell people started last millennium, make it easier. Been in comp ben talent acquisition since then. Started in development, etc., into business management, and currently at Visier managing the total reward suite of products that we have at Visier, which is layered on top of the people analytics platform.
Correct. And Sean, can you tell us a little into how you ended up in the domain of total rewards? I mean, clearly you do not have an educational background that led you to here, but then eventually from marketing to doing something with someone, and then you ended up in Visier
Yeah.
in total rewards. How is that?
It's a little bit to do with my age, actually. A little bit, and I say that because I went to work for Fidelity Capital to do some marketing for one of their platforms, and they needed help building out some of the 401k, but really the core piece was they bought a series of newspapers in Eastern Massachusetts,
Okay.
and to get those newspaper listings and some of the newspaper stories online, they needed someone to kind of do some of the technology. And so we just had to learn it. There wasn't really education at that time for things like that, pulling it out of Quark Express, you know, trying to get it into Adobe and then getting it into online, really old school Oracle, database Java when it was just coming out where we learned it in a book. Um, and then while I was doing some of that for the newspapers, part of the newspapers is obviously the classified advertisements.
Right.
Um, and so I'd done a presentation with the founder of Monster.com back in the day, Jeff Taylor, and we went and had lunch and told me all the cool stuff they were doing and asked if I would be interested in bouncing over there and getting into the TA space, which was new online at the time. My worst negotiation job ever. He basically asked how much I wanted to make. I told him. He said fine, and I knew totally too low. But I was stoked. So then from TA, then I did just bounce around and weirdly over the years it's been TA to comp to benefits to expatriation, kind of back to comp. So it's been around almost everything in total rewards, including statements and such and aggregation at Uflex.
Got it. Perfect. Sean, why don't you talk more around your journey at Uflex and then now at Visier. You've seen this space change a lot, right? How do you think it has matured? Or maybe let's take a step back. How would you define total rewards today and how that has changed over the period of years?
I think total rewards, really hasn't changed. The language has changed, but you talk about, if you wanted to define it as comp one, two, three, four, five, you know,
Right.
base comp, short term incentives, long term incentives, benefits, and the always infamous rewards, or the fifth category of flex
Right.
stuff, right? Culture, whatever value you want to put on that. That's been around almost since I've been around. I think what's changed is the ability to aggregate a lot of data and actually all that data, right? And speaking as an American in particular, our benefits programs are crazy, right? We don't have nationalized benefits. So your medical is different from your dental, is different from any of your other pension. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. All those data was managed very in a, for lack of a better term, a serial process. Like
Right.
someone managed benefits and your medical benefits, and that was it. Someone took care of your comp and made sure payroll happened. Fine. Once a year, someone did short-term incentives, and that was hard, right? Because you had to get everyone's data in, whether they wrote it to you or put it in Lotus Notes or Excel when it came out, and then you had to put that together, and that was hard. And I think what's happened is the fundamentals of that hasn't changed. The ability to tie it all together with technology on one side has changed, and then on the other side, and I think luckily technology's moved along, employees, specifically in the US and Europe, are expecting to know more about their pay and how competitive they are. I actually would ask you the question in Asia, like, I don't think it's there yet, right?
Right.
In the U.S., though, I live in the state of Massachusetts. I can legally ask any of my peers what they make, and
Correct.
so that used to be a no-no, right? There was no way you could do that, and so I think the ability to or the need to communicate, understand what the benefits are, put them together in a holistic package, and say, here's your package, Anuraga, what you have and what it
Right.
means to you, and make sure it's right, has become real at the same time technology's moved ahead. But none of that stuff, I don't think has changed. 35 years ago, you sit down with your boss, again, when I was five, and they basically would say, here's your base pay, here's how your bonus is structured, here's what you can get for equity if you're at Fidelity. It was Phantom shares at the time. Here's your benefits you can select from. Fine. But I didn't actually know if the dude next to me got the same thing. Like, you
Right.
didn't know.
Got it. So you're saying total rewards, essentially the essence of it hasn't changed that much. Basically, anything that an employee finds valuable should come in total rewards. And just that the way of communicating that might have gotten better or might have gotten changed. For example, do you see now in the US and in European companies, are all the companies communicating total rewards to their employees and candidates, or it is still the cash compensation that takes the most of the real estate in your offer letters?
I think it's all over the board. I think for short term incentives and base pay, so 1 year total cash, I think
Right.
people are communicating that pretty consistently. When you start moving up to some of benefits in the US, for example,
Right.
do you communicate the value to me or the cost to the employer? So the
Interesting.
employers can buy in bulk. I have to go buy at a different marketplace, right? If
Right.
I was going to do that on long term incentives, what value to it do you assign to that? And people don't stay as long. If you give me a 5 year earnout on my last set of options or my RSUs, like I might not value years 4 and 5 because who stays at a job that long anymore?
Right.
I might value the first years, type of thing. So I think those are a little trickier, but I think consistently it's there. Where it gets, I think, tricky is with all the secondary awards. So all the other items. Do you have a bike? Do you have gym memberships? Do you have, you know, uh, letting bikes? Do you have, other types of medical care? Do you have child care? Do you have
Right.
leave? What is that all worth? And to some people that's worth nothing.
Correct.
So my kids, I'm old, as you pointed out earlier. Thank you. I'm old, so my kids are all off the payroll. So if you told me that I had programs that would allow me to pay for my kids to go to university, that I could, medical benefits for them, all that, I'd be like, I don't value that because I don't fundamentally need
Correct.
it. Whereas someone who might have 3 kids in the middle of school is like, that is worth a lot of money to me.
Exactly. So, which brings me to my next question, that different people would different, would value rewards differently, right? For example, as in your case, it might be different. In my case, it might be different. So, how do the companies as of now tackle this problem? Because they're, in effect, they're spending on all of this while they're giving this to you, even though you might not value this. How do the companies tackle this as of now? Of course, they can. I'm not sure. I would let you answer. What is the solution that exists as of now?
So there are legislative bounds, right? So,
Right.
and again, if anyone couldn't tell, I'm an American. So, we have legislative bounds in that what I offer some employees for benefits, I have to offer the others. So that has changed
Right.
over the years, right? Where I think it gets trickier for companies is, if I have really good benefits for older, people, so I'm matching pension more later, but you really want to hire 25-year olds, right? Who don't even think they're going to have to work, 40 years is an eternity for somebody at 25, right? They're not
Right.
thinking about pension. They want cash. They also have fundamental issues with like, I need to pay the bill. So if they're in a high expense area and you're low earlier in your career, like cash is
Correct.
king.
Correct.
I need to be able to eat and stay somewhere. I'm not worried about pension yet. And so
Correct.
the ability to maybe move those levers around and say, I want to trade in some of my long term incentive for base pay, maybe at a discount, or I want to trade, lower base pay if I'm older and have more incentive because I'm trying to build wealth before I retire.
Right.
Those are all out there, but there's also now legislation that's going to happen around pay equity. So how does that
Correct.
affect pay equity, right? So if I'm
Exactly.
taking other items, so there's a lot of moving parts that I think are really tough for total rewards professionals now to start figuring out, because they've got what I need to do with my business, and then they have the legislative bounds that are now coming around what I'm allowed to do,
Correct.
and the transparency and equity piece that I have to show.
Precisely, right? So, if your candidate or an employee chooses to have more long term incentives and less of cash, eventually, when you're doing your pay equity audit on maybe the cash component, there looks like a person who's underpaid. And then your compensation programs will have sort of kickers to make sure that this person is fairly paid. And then you would end up giving more in cash as well, right? Because there would be a multiplier because this person is underpaid in terms of cash. So, all of those also would come into play. In that case, is customization or personalization of rewards when it comes to also swapping between cash, equity, and rewards and benefits, is that actually feasible given pay equity compliances, or that is not something that will make sense now?
I think it'll get caught up. So I think things like, right now, some countries have just the raw pay gap, right? Gender pay gap.
Right.
And that's a starting point. Legislation, I think, will catch up, and they will say we can use regression. Again, since you made fun of me, Anurag, I've been doing this a long time. You have not, right? And so if we look at length of service or experience or what have you as one of the variates in a multivariate regression analysis, we
Right.
might look even. But if we looked at the raw pay gap, we might look different, right?
Correct.
I think the legislation will catch up. I think it will catch up with personalized rewards. I actually, like, if you really want me to prognosticate, I think at some point when technology allows people to pick and choose and work with all the vendors seamlessly, they're going to say, Anurag, we're going to pay everyone in this role 200,000 US. Fine.
Got it.
um, and put some bounds on it that say you can have, you have to have a minimum of 150 and a maximum of 180 for your base salary, and you pick.
Right.
You do whatever, right? And so if you want to take medical benefits because you've got a
Correct.
family, I'll pull those out. I don't have them. I want cash, right? And then at the end of the pay equity piece, you can add those pieces up in a total reward statement so that the total reward statement, when it aligns, we all look like we're getting $200,000 for that job.
Right.
Fundamentally, we're spending the money different, just like we do at home anyway. You and I
Correct.
probably spend our money differently.
Correct.
I don't know if does the term translate redneck. Does that term translate? Country bumpkin, someone who lives out in the country. So that's
Oh,
how I
right.
spend. I'm a little more like that, less city. Right?
Right.
So I spend my money differently, and so we're just migrating that into the employee to make
Correct.
that choice even sooner in their process of when they get their pay. So I
Got it.
do think it's going to get there, but legislation has to catch up. I do think tech has caught up. So I think you both in the toolings around total reward statements, personalized rewards. That's where UFlex, is kind of
Correct.
was going. You're seeing it. We do a lot of comp planning and analytics, where
Right.
companies are pulling in the ability to do your compensation planning or your merit process, and
Correct.
allow you to have multiple things to choose. Do you want to pick base pay, short term incentives, long term incentives? We can pull in all that data as well as like any other data, and then look at all how people are utilizing those rewards through the analytics. And so I think that's all possible now. There's just this weird timing of legislative and tech. And then it's really hard for companies. Like, if there's an overworked group in a company, it might be the comp team. Like, I haven't seen an underworked comp team anywhere. Like, in 30 years, there's not an underworked compensation person hanging out waiting for things to do. That person doesn't exist. So they would have to then make the migration somehow. Like, migrating's hard.
Got it. Got it. And given the legislations around pay transparency, now when you communicate total rewards to your employees, they might also ask for how they are paid compared to the internal compensation range. And you also mentioned with respect to peers, right? Maybe they'll not directly ask how much my peer is making, but they'll ask how am I placed in the entire range that you have for the organization. How does that impact or change the way in which we communicate rewards? Because now, along with communication of rewards, there needs to be an education, or there needs to be an explanation of why so much. Earlier it is this is so much and this is a breakup, but now you also have to communicate and educate on why so much. How is that happening?
So I think that's where technology can help a lot, right? Because I think in the past, and I will say, manager discretion, if you believe in it or not, we may be on different soapboxes. I think when you give managers discretion, that's where you get into some slippery slopes, depending how much discretion you give them, right?
Right.
So you might give them some discretion, a quarter of a point, because you and I might have this, so pay equity is same pay for same work, right? So you
Correct.
and I might look like we're doing the same work, but the manager might realize that Sean really is a pain in the ass to work with, and Anurag's really good to work with, and so I want to slide some of that money around because the team atmosphere is a softer thing than output, right?
Correct.
So now because then I can formulaically put together what you're paid. Hey, Anurag, your base pay is this. This is kind of where you stack up in the market. I can put
Right.
that into my pay letter or portal, whatever you want to use. Here's your short-term incentive. Here's the calculation for that short-term incentive. So for a
Right.
level 4, P4 at this level for your role, it's based on this much company performance, this much individual performance. Company did this. Your performance was this. Here's your long-term incentives. They're granted based on tenure. Whatever you're doing, tenure
Correct.
grants, performance, like all that stuff now gets shoved out, and then you can add the benefits in and basically say that's what you selected. Here's where your options were. Here's what was selected, and add all that up. So I think
Correct.
there's the opportunity to make it very formulaic. It's when I think there's discretion. The term that an ex-coworker of mine at Korn Ferry uses a lot is management discretion is the enemy of pay equity.
Interesting. So you're saying, take all decisions more and more centrally than actually democratizing that decision to the managers.
So there's a couple pieces. This I get on the soapbox a little bit. So um, a couple of things. They have the ability to determine who's good and bad for the
Performance
year,
rating.
right?
Right.
You have performance, which is an imperfect thing to begin with, right?
Correct.
So, and I'm not convinced all managers want to be in charge of this salary discretion to begin with, right? So if you think about it, if you
Right.
told me, Sean, you're not a good performer, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an increase, it was just enough to cover your Netflix increase for next year, like
Correct.
that's a hard discussion.
That is
But
true.
to make that discussion worse, you have to go to work with me tomorrow. So it's not like I'm pissed and then I see you a year later, right?
Correct.
I'm angry at you and then I have to go work with you the next
Correct.
day. If you formulaically put that together, you can put HR under the bus and you can start to do things like true pay for performance. So think
Correct.
about the spread in a matrix where you've got range by performance. You create that grid and now you can create a lot of spread. Are you a company that really values high performance? So if I've got a 4% increase for a year, I can give high performers 9. Well, I got to give some people less. So I can create
Correct.
a lot of dispersion. I can also create dispersion for position and range where
Right.
they are. They're high in the range, they get less, low in the range, they get more. Now I
Correct.
can handle some compression issues. I can handle pay equity issues because that's not gender specific. I can do all those things as a comp professional who's skilled at this, who looks
Correct.
at the company, all the analytics, all my pay equity and analytics, all that together and make a really educated, formulaic path to get there.
Correct.
The manager, on the other hand, that's not what they got hired for. The manager gets hired. I can't imagine anybody who got hired at a factory to manage the process engineering department. In the process of hiring them, did they say, so how do you handle a merit matrix? And how do you dole out cash based on performance at the year end? No. The other example I use a little more extreme for the process engineer, if the professional went down to the process engineer's job for 30 minutes, about the amount of time that we train a manager, looked at him, looked at his job and said, I've got a lot of things I want to tell you about your job and how you should do it because I'm now an expert at this
Right.
job. I think we can make it better. How's that conversation going to go?
Got it. Got it.
Not well, right? It's because you're the expert. I think where the gap has been is in communication. I think it's communication to managers in process, communication to employees upfront before the merit to say, here's how we pay. We
Got it.
fundamentally pay for performance. If you're a five, and we pay by position and range because we're an equitable paying company, because we
Correct.
want to pay people at 60th percentile. We get all that communication out of the way. The manager does the rating. They have control, right? So if they say, Sean, you're an awful employee, you're a one, that's fine. But if he likes me and gives me a three, he's going to game the system, right? But there's only so
Right.
much money. The math works the system inside of a tool. So I think then the manager can sit down and have that discussion, and the communication just happens throughout, and they get the pay letter. In the past, it's been very like, hey, here's 3%, 4%, here's your budget. Fine. They give you a 20-page PowerPoint on how we pay for performance, how important it is, right?
Correct.
And then they sell the manager to do it. And I think the natural inclination then is to say, they gave me 4%. I'm going to peanut butter spread that across at 4%
Correct.
because actually this job sucks and I don't want to do it. And B,
Right.
telling people they're not going to make as much money sucks. I'm not going to do it. And if they're angry at me, that also sucks. So I'll blame HR and say we all got 4%. And so we're all angry at HR. Right?
Interesting. Interesting. So you see this trend where more and more decisions will then be taken centrally versus it getting democratized. As in the companies, have you seen more companies opting for more manager control or more central control?
I think it's more central control with guardrails. So you're giving
Got
managers discretion. But in the past, if you had a 4% increase, they had like huge range, right? Could be
Correct.
zero, could be 12.
Got it.
And so other performers weren't doing it. The math was also hard. So I think people centered on a middle point. There's a behavioral economist named Daniel Kahneman, who
Right.
basically, if you're familiar with him, he basically talks about the anchor point. And so the anchor point is if I tell you, Anurag, here's all the reasons why Sean should be paid a 1.5% increase this year.
Right.
His performance, all the data comes in. Again, we can pull in a lot of data, right?
Correct.
To talk about performance. Here's how long he's been. Here's his position in range. Here's all this. It's a
Correct.
1.5. Okay, that makes sense. But again, Sean's actually kind of not fun to work with. So I'm going to move him down. I got a quarter point, and Anurag's fun to work with. I'm going to move that money around a little bit. But now I
Right.
stay within the bounds. With pay equity and pay transparency, this whole like, I really like Sean, but he's a really crappy employee. I want to give him money. You can't do that anymore because it's equal pay for equal work. So if I'm doing poor work and you're doing good work, you need to get paid more.
Correct. Do you think pay transparency, pay equity is anti pay for performance?
I'm sorry, one more time. So just
Okay. Pay for performance as a philosophy and maintaining pay equity. These are actually contradicting each other, or these are sort of in sort of if you are pro pay for performance, you cannot
yeah.
manage pay equity,
No,
and
so
if you manage,
the way I used to phrase it was when it first came out, I think people were a little confused. And I say that because exactly for what you're saying. I need to highly differentiate pay, right?
right,
But I need to pay you the same. Those are the two things going on, right?
correct,
But pay equity, and I think as people, and it's not taking comp people long. Comp people are really smart, right? Total rewards people. It's equal pay for equal performance.
right,
So everybody that's a three needs to be put through the same rules and guidelines. That's a three for that specific cohort of roles.
correct,
They need to be paid the same. I can no longer say, and actually I am one, so I'll say it this way. I can't give the old white guys more money just because they've been here longer or I've known him longer or whatever. I can't do that anymore, right?
right,
Because Anurag and Sean have the same performance, and now we have rules about where they are for position and range, whether that's to make up for pay equity because Anurag was behind. He's not an old white guy, right?
right,
He was behind. Position and range will start to catch that. The pay equity set aside, if you do that, can be handled in the same methodology based on position and range and everything else and where you are with regression. So all those things actually, I think pay equity and transparency will help. I mean, at the end of the day, like all we're really asking, if you think about it, all this terminology is can we just please be really good humans and pay people for their
fairly,
performance, right? Pay them
right,
equitably regardless of any other dynamics other than their output at work? Can we just simply do that? That's really what we're asking the system to do. And so I think if you explain and again communicate that to managers, this is why we're doing this. This is
Got
how
it.
it works. Explain to them where a pay for performance means, these things, and we're trying to pay equitably, which means based on where you're paid already, there's going to be a differentiation. I don't see it as a huge issue if you communicate.
Got it. Got it. And Sean, my last question would be around uh, managing pay equity for an organization. Part one of the question is it like a large company problem only? And second part of the question is, whom does it exactly fall upon? Is it the total rewards team, or is it the CHRO, or is it the founder's office, or it is actually the legal team's mandate to do? Who, of course, teams might eventually get involved collectively and do it, but whose ownership this is to actually think about, and who fights for budget for this?
So I think there's a lot. That's one giant question. So if you think about the way, if you're going to do a pay equity review, right? So I think that falls. I think it falls under the CHRO. The
Okay.
CFO obviously is going to be involved. If you think about it, in the never have I ever heard category, is we're going to reduce anyone's pay to make it equitable, right? There's
Right.
only one way we solve this problem, right?
Correct.
Two, if you count hiring correctly, both of them involve more money, right?
Correct.
I think the CFO has to be aligned. When you think about the process of really tackling and creating a program, I believe in the US and in Western Europe. I don't know, Asia as well, but you want to get a third party legal counsel. There is basically this piece of basically having that secret, understanding what's going on.
Right.
The confidentiality, less than secret, is really prime and getting started very, very early, because the ostrich method of putting your head in the sand isn't going to work forever in all places. So
Got it.
once I have a third party, now I can go do my equity analysis. This should be done by, CHRO, total rewards team. I'm pulling in all those things, which means, are my jobs evaluated right? Do I have the right levels? Are the grades? Is everyone in the right role?
Correct.
All the mid-sized companies are infamous for, I started as a developer one. I'm now the head of development or engineering, but I'm still in the system as developer one,
Correct.
right? And so you've got to get all these cohorts, both for those jobs and the levels in the company, because pay equity, also the cohorts get handled at a larger level than just individual roles, right? It's
Correct.
at basically everyone at level 1 or 2. So I go through that process, I go through the regression modeling, and then I figure this out. Let's assume you have a problem. So then the question again, with counsel's guidance, do I tackle this like right now? Do I tackle it over 3 years?
Correct.
And again, however I tackle it, it's a total rewards issue.
Got
Um,
it.
there's analytics that also come into play. So if you think about in the US, I'll pick on the US a little bit. Retail stores, high turnover, right?
Right.
So do I throw money at all my current employees, or do I actually manage part of this for people that are way behind, like two standard deviations out in regression or more, and I deal with hiring properly because that'll solve
Right.
my problem? Or am I in a business that has 2% turnover and I don't have a choice? We need to handle this. Then the question is, how do I handle it through the comp planning process and
Correct.
or remediation process? And that's where technology, again, the ability to model out and have a really complex matrix,
Correct.
that used to not be tenable because you'd have 100 spreadsheets out, and you'd have to now concatenate those sheets and figure out if you're doing your equity, doing your comp planning equitably, and am I remediating, and then checking and making sure I do that again. So then you put that process in place, and then I think you can bring it in house from a legal counsel standpoint once you're kind
Right.
of there and you have a program, and then have a review done. From a company size standpoint, um, Europe has basically said 250 employees or more. They haven't been very clear on if that is for one country or all your countries,
Correct.
which could be difficult because there's companies like France that only allow you to collect gender. So I don't know how you're going to do it across any other variants because you legally can't ask the question.
Correct.
You're doing it, you're cheating. If you're not doing it, you're bad. Like it becomes a problem.
Correct.
Um, but I think you can get some premise of what's going on and look at that. At 250 or 500 employees, you can also put it in a spreadsheet and kind of start to look and say, well, where do I have problems and why do I
Correct.
have a problem? Like Sean's paid less than the others. Okay, he's a bad employee. I got that. That's fine. Or why is Sean paid so much more? He's an old white dude that's not a good performer. Like we have to red circle him and let everyone catch up and document that we have a plan in place for that. So it's
Got
a
it.
complicated question around like how do you get started, but there's some really good tools out there. But I would say there are some very good consultancies, globally, that do pay equity, that have the legal counsel to basically allow you to figure out how you tackle that in every country.
Got it.
Um, and the last example I'll give you is on remediation. If we figured out that we were paying women 20% less, and I just threw a lot of money at them in 1 year, what would your first question be?
Why was I paid so less for so long?
Yeah. So, like that's just asking for another problem as opposed to just saying we're fixing our issues equitably over time and remediate over 3 years, which takes technology to be involved too. So, legal
Correct.
counsel might say, actually, that's okay in this case because we've been around for 4 years. Don't worry about it. Or they might say, absolutely do not try to solve this problem like
In
that.
one go.
The
Yeah.
last piece I'll say is where the budget comes from. Um, in some of the comp planning and analytics tools now, you have the ability to look at like budgeted versus actual. So the example I use a lot is if I want to do a 4% merit increase and a 0.75% pay equity set aside, how much is that?
Correct.
It's 4 and 3/4, right? Like that's the old
Correct.
school
Correct.
answer. The new answer might actually be 4%. And I say that because we might find out that budgeted to actual would turn over open headcount, time to fill, everything across my business. When I to look at all the analytics and look at budgeted versus actual, our annual spend is 3.25. So I can actually take what was budgeted minus the difference there and make that my pay equity set aside, and work at it. But you have to have all the analytics because what's the CFO going to ask? Is this
Correct.
true or are you just making this crap up before I get to next year? Right. The
Correct.
question is no. Historically, we've been between 3.25% and 3.5%. Actual budget's 4. Okay, so let's take 0.5% and we're going to stay under budget. But you have to have those analytics, and that's one way to address the pay equity set aside is understanding where you had gaps and had dollars already that could be spent.
Got it. Perfect, Sean. We're almost time, and thank you so much for all the lovely insights. This has been very exciting. Thank you so much for your time again.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, man.